Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Ready to get those brain cells working. Today, we're diving into some serious philosophy, Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard.
Ooh, yeah, that's a deep one.
You know, you said you were interested in unpacking this, and, well, let me just warn you, it's not exactly a light beach read.
No, definitely not.
But Baudrillard, he gets to the heart of how signs and symbols, those things, they've kind of taken over reality in our modern world.
Mm,
He even goes as far as saying that we're living in this hyper-reality to where simulations, like, replace the real thing.
yeah, it's a wild concept to think about.
It really is. It makes you question, like, what's even real anymore? It's going to be a wild ride today, folks. I'm glad to have our expert here with us to kind of break this down, help us make sense of it all.
Absolutely. I think Baudrillard's ideas are incredibly relevant today, maybe even more so than when he first wrote them.
Right. So let's jump right in. One of the core concepts Baudrillard talks about are these simulacra. Imagine like you've got a map, right?
Okay.
It represents a certain territory.
Uh-huh.
But what if that map becomes more real to us than the actual territory itself?
Hmm.
That's where we get into this world of simulacra.
Mm-hmm.
It's copies without an original,
Yeah.
where like the representation, the symbol, whatever, it becomes like more important than the actual thing it's supposed to be representing.
It's like we're living in a world of reflections, but we've forgotten that there was ever an object being reflected in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And this leads to what he calls hyperreality.
Right. Hyperreality is it's kind of like a simulated reality that's totally detached from any real meaning.
So it's not just that we have copies. It's that the copies have become more real than the original. It's like almost like imagine you're so used to seeing those perfectly filtered pictures on Instagram, you know,
Yeah.
then you see someone like in real life and you're like, "Whoa, wait a minute."
I know, right? It's like we're all walking around with filters on in real life.
It's kind of scary, you know.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, we were talking about Disneyland or
Yeah.
Baudrillard. He uses Disneyland as like a prime example
Uh-huh.
to illustrate this whole hyper reality thing. He claims, it's presented as this fantasy world,
Yeah.
right, to make us believe that like the rest of America, that's the real deal.
It's a fascinating point. He's not saying that Disneyland is fake per se, but he's arguing that it's hyperreal.
Yeah.
It's a simulation that's so perfect, so meticulously crafted, that it actually makes us question the authenticity of everything outside of it.
Hold on. So are you saying that Disneyland might be more real than, say, my daily commute on the subway?
Think of it this way. Disneyland is designed to be this nostalgic, sanitized version of America. Everything is clean, happy, predictable,
Yeah.
And because it's presented as this idealized version, it makes the real world seem messier, more chaotic, and in a way, less real by comparison.
Oh, okay. I think I get it. It's like Disneyland's. It's like that perfect Instagram filter, but but applied to like the whole American experience.
Precisely. And this raises a really interesting question. Where do you see hyperreality in your own life?
Right. Like think about that.
What are those places or experiences that feel more real precisely because they are so carefully curated, so controlled?
It's mind blowing when you really start to think about it, how much our perception is shaped by these simulations.
Absolutely.
And speaking of like the power of images, Baudrillard also brings up iconoclasts.
Yeah.
Those who destroyed religious images.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I never really thought about it this way before, but he's suggesting they understood that images could become like more real than the divine itself.
They were afraid of the image overshadowing, maybe even replacing the very thing it was supposed to represent. In a way, they were terrified of the power of simulacra, even back then.
It's like they were afraid of the image becoming a kind of idol, like more real than the God it was supposed to be showing us. Which actually, if you think about it, it's not that different from our world today. I mean, we are constantly bombarded with images, symbols, all this stuff that shapes our desires, our beliefs, even our sense of like who we are.
It's true, and this fascination with images, with capturing and representing reality, it leads us to another point that Baudrillard makes about ethnography, the study of cultures.
Oh yeah, great.
He argues that instead of really understanding cultures, ethnography often ends up like museumifying them.
Zoomifying them. So instead of experiencing a culture like firsthand, we get this sanitized, packaged version.
Exactly. It's a simulation of the culture. culture, stripped of all its complexity and presented as this static, unchanging thing.
Like a souvenir from a gift shop.
Yeah, exactly, like a cultural artifact.
We have a pretty shocking example of this, don't we? The Tazadeh tribe.
Oh, yes, the Tazadeh. That's a classic example. They were presented as this lost tribe, completely isolated from the modern world,
Yeah.
but it turned out to be a complete hoax.
Yeah, they were basically like encouraged to portray themselves as this primitive people.
Right, for the benefit of the media and anthropologists.
So even our attempts to find authenticity, to find something real, it could be like caught up in this web of simulations, like there's no escape.
That's the unsettling truth that Baudrillard forces us to confront. The line between the real and the simulated, it's becoming so blurred that it's almost impossible to tell the difference.
I need a minute to process all this. I'm sure our listeners do too. We've covered a lot, from simulacra and hyperreality to Disneyland and the Tazadeh tribe.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
This is heavy stuff.
Yeah, let's take a moment to let these ideas sink in before we move on to Baudrillard's analysis of some of the major anxieties of the 20th century. Things are about to get even more interesting.
Go boy.
Buckle up.
I'm a little scared, but all right, let's do it.
So, let's kind of shift gears a bit and explore how Baudrillard connects this idea of simulation to like some of the big anxieties of the 20th century.
Okay.
And really there's no better place to start than the Cold War. I
Right.
mean, that constant fear of nuclear annihilation, right? It just hung over everything.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine what that must have felt like, living under that kind of threat.
It really is. But Baudrillard, he suggests that very threat, that possibility of total nuclear war, it was so terrifying that it actually became unreal.
Unreal.
He argues that it created a simulated state of peace.
I don't know if I follow that.
It is a bit paradoxical,
Yeah.
but think about it. The potential for nuclear war, it was so catastrophic, so unthinkable that it almost pushed us into this realm of hyperreality. You know what I mean?
Okay.
The threat itself became a kind of simulation, a deterrent. It shaped everything but never actually happened.
So it's like we were living in this constant state of like suspended terror, always aware of the potential for disaster, but never actually experiencing it.
Exactly. And this logic of deterrence, right? This living under constant threat.
Huh?
It started to seep into like every aspect of life. It created this society of control and surveillance. We were constantly being watched, monitored, managed, and in a way that created its own kind of simulation.
Like a simulated sense of security.
Maybe, yeah. And I think you can see how this connects to a lot of our contemporary anxieties too,
Yeah, right.
Think about like terrorism or climate change or even the pandemic.
Right.
All these events, they create this atmosphere of uncertainty,
Yeah.
of potential catastrophe that shapes how we see the world.
Totally. And you can't talk about this stuff without talking about the media, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And how the media plays this huge role in amplifying this sense of anxiety.
Right. Like, remember when we were talking about hyperreality? Well, Baudrillard, he argues that the media, it doesn't just represent reality, it actually becomes reality.
Wow.
This constant flow of news and images and information, it creates this simulated world that we inhabit.
Yeah.
A world that's often more intense or more dramatic, more terrifying than actual reality.
Right. And this overabundance of information, it's like an implosion of meaning, like he says.
It really is. It's like there's so much noise, so many competing voices that it's hard to know what's real and what's not.
Yeah. It's like if everything is screaming for your attention, nothing really stands out.
Exactly. It's like trying to have a conversation at a rock concert.
Right. You can hear the noise, but you can't make out what anyone's saying.
Baudrillard, he uses a really interesting example to kind of illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah? What was that?
The Loud Family documentary. Have you heard of it?
Vaguely. It was that reality TV show from way back, right?
Yeah, from the 70s.
They followed that family around with cameras.
Right, a typical American family. And the interesting thing is that, their life completely fell apart during filming.
Really?
Oh yeah, they went through all these personal struggles, separations, the whole 9 yards, and ultimately the show just became this chronicle of their disintegration.
Wow. So it was like a total train wreck.
Oh yeah, huge scandal at the time. And for Baudrillard, it was the perfect example of how the media, in its quest to capture reality, it actually ends up consuming and destroying the very thing that it's trying to represent.
So it's like the media, it needs to create these spectacles, these dramatic narratives to keep our attention, even if it means like sacrificing the actual authenticity of the experience.
Exactly. Which, it makes you wonder about this whole concept of reality TV, doesn't it?
It really does. But, speaking of manipulation,
Hmm.
there's another connection that Baudrillard makes that I want to unpack a bit.
Okay.
He links the world of work and consumption in this simulated world.
Yeah,
And he argues that even work itself has become a kind of simulation.
it's true.
I mean, how does that work?
Well, he suggests that in a world of hyperreality, work is no longer about production,
Okay.
Like it's not about creating something tangible, something useful. It's more about fulfilling this social demand, Almost like leisure.
So it's not about like what you produce, it's about like how you perform. Like
Yeah,
like work has become this kind of stage where we're acting out our roles.
that's the idea.
I'm not sure I'm buying it.
Well, think about your own work experience.
Okay.
How much of it involved actually doing things that feel, meaningful and fulfilling
Right.
versus, just cooking through the motions,
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
like playing the game.
There are definitely times when I feel like I'm just like checking boxes, playing the role of like, productive employee.
Exactly.
But how does this tie into consumption?
Well, Baudrillard, he argues that this shift in the nature of work, it's closely tied to the rise of the hypermarket.
The hypermarket.
Yeah, those massive spaces of consumption where people go not just to buy things, but to engage in this kind of simulated social interaction.
So the hypermarket is like the stage for our simulated lives.
It is in a way. Think about it, right? The hypermarket, it's this carefully controlled environment, endless rows of products, bright lights, this constant flow of people. It's designed to create this sense of abundance, of choice,
Uh-huh.
of a kind of simulated community where everyone is participating in this grand spectacle of consumption.
So are you saying that our choices, our desires, even our identities are all just products of this simulated system?
It's a question worth considering, isn't it? Are we all just, cogs in this massive simulated machine? Baudrillard wants us to grapple with these questions, to think critically about how these systems of simulation shape our lives. He doesn't offer easy answers,
Right.
but he wants us to be aware.
It's a lot to think about. And to be honest, it's making me feel a little uneasy.
I get it. It's unsettling stuff.
Like, what if there's no escape from this simulated world?
Well, Baudrillard does offer some potential avenues for resistance. They're not exactly straightforward, but to illustrate his point, he turns to this really provocative example,
Okay.
J.G. Ballard's novel Crash.
Oh, wow. Crashed. Yeah, that's intense.
That's one way to put it.
I remember being completely like floored when I first read it.
Oh yeah.
For those who haven't read it, it follows this group of people who become sexually aroused by car crashes.
It's a wild ride.
Yeah, wild's one word for it. So what does Baudrillard see in this novel?
For him, Crash, it represents the epitome of a world that's consumed by simulation.
Okay.
The characters in the novel, they've become so detached from reality. They're so immersed in this world of technology and speed and violence that their desires have become completely warped.
Hmm.
They find pleasure in like the most destructive aspects of modern life. They blur the lines between sex and death and technology.
It's like the ultimate expression of this idea that the real and the simulated, they've become indistinguishable.
Exactly. And that's the chilling question that Baudrillard leaves us with.
What is it?
Is Crash just a dystopian fantasy,
Yeah.
or is it a reflection of our own increasingly simulated reality?
Oh, wow.
What happens when we can no longer tell the difference between the map and the territory?
Right.
What happens when the simulation becomes more real than the real?
Those are some heavy questions. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on already.
I think so too.
I got to say it's been a wild ride.
It has. But even though Baudrillard, paints this kind of bleak picture of our simulated reality,
Right.
he does offer some glimmers of hope, right?
Okay, good. Because I mean, honestly, I was starting to feel a little hopeless there.
Yeah, I get it.
So what does he suggest? Like, how do we fight back against this all-encompassing simulation?
Well, he proposes this concept he calls the pataphysics of simulacra.
Pataphysics of, okay, slow down there. I got to write this one down. Pataphysics of simulacra. What is that?
Yeah, it is a mouthful, but basically it's about, using the tools of simulation against itself.
So like fighting fire with fire.
Kind of, yeah. It's recognizing that we're already embedded in the system,
Yeah.
but we can still find ways to subvert it to create these cracks in the facade of hyperreality.
I'm still not sure I totally get what that would look like in practice, you know. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about like the rise of irony and satire in our culture today.
Right.
The way we use memes and humor to kind of point out the absurdity of these systems we're all caught in.
Right.
It's a way of acknowledging the power of simulation, but also undermining it at the same time.
Hmm.
We're playing with the symbols, the images, the narratives
Yeah.
to expose their emptiness, their artificiality.
So instead of like taking everything at face value, we're using humor, exaggeration to kind of highlight the absurdity of it all. It's like if we can laugh at it, it loses some of its power over us.
Right. It's not about, creating this true or authentic alternative
Yeah.
because those concepts themselves might be, a part of the simulation. It's
Yeah.
about disrupting the system,
Hmm.
exposing the flaws and creating those moments of genuine connection and meaning, within the simulated world.
This reminds me of I was on Instagram. I think it was just the other day, and somebody posted this picture of themselves on a beach, right?
Hmm.
And it was like this perfect beach, and they were like, looking all amazing, and the caption said, "Living my best simulated life."
Uh-huh, perfect.
And I just thought it was so funny because it was like, they were acknowledging the curated nature of it,
Right.
but they were also making fun of it at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's that self-awareness, that playful critique that Baudrillard sees as this potential form of resistance. It's
Hmm.
it's like recognizing the game but refusing to play it by its rules.
I like that. So even though Baudrillard, he gives us this kind of pretty bleak picture of this simulated reality that we're living in,
Right.
he's not saying that we should just like give up, right?
No, not at
Like
all.
resign ourselves to this life of meaningless consumption and empty spectacles.
He wants us to be critical, to be aware, and to find those ways to resist.
Yeah.
It's not about finding this escape route. It's about creating these spaces of resistance, of meaning within the system itself.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like I need to go back and like re-examine everything I see and experience through this new lens,
I think that's the best takeaway you could have from Baudrillard's work, really.
Yeah.
It's not about easy answers or comforting solutions. It's about, shaking us out of our complacency, challenging us to see the world differently.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this dense and thought-provoking work. It's really been mind-bending.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fun to dive into Baudrillard.
And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you in our exploration of simulacra and simulation? What are the Disneylands in your own life? And how do you find ways to resist the pull of the hyperreal? Let us know. Until next time, keep diving deep.